Welcome back to Clark USA fans. Mark lofts it high, and it drops clean through the net for three. On the surface, everything about this game screamed dominance. The numbers told a simple, overwhelming story: Team USA cruising, leading by 55 points, delivering what looked like a complete and unquestionable statement performance. Clark pulls up another three, and it feels automatic, effortless, inevitable. But here's the truth that doesn't show up on the scoreboard in sports. Just like in war, the final numbers rarely reveal the full reality of what actually happened. Because hidden behind that massive victory margin, buried beneath the noise of a blowout, was something far more important. Something subtle, but powerful. Something only a few people watching closely truly noticed. For a brief stretch, just 6 minutes, Caitlin Clark didn't just play basketball. She exposed something. She revealed a weakness. She turned a routine win into a tactical lesson. And while the crowd celebrated the scoreline, coaches were watching something completely different. Analysts were taking notes. Because those 6 minutes? They mattered more than the entire 55-point margin. If you think a blowout like this means perfection, think again. This wasn't just another easy win. This was a blueprint. A breakdown. A quiet warning sign wrapped inside a victory. And today, we're going to go deeper than the highlights. We're going to unpack every shift, every adjustment, every moment where Caitlin Clark forced a crack in what looked like an unbeatable system. So stay with me, because what you're about to understand doesn't just change how you see this game, it changes how you see everything moving forward. Now here's where things get really interesting. Despite the massive gap on the scoreboard, this didn't feel like one game. It felt like two completely different games stitched together. Two identities. Two versions of Team USA. And the contrast between them reveals everything about where this team truly stands right now, especially with tougher competition waiting ahead. The opening phase of the game wasn't smooth at all. In fact, it was surprisingly shaky. Team USA came out flat, lacking energy, lacking rhythm. The offense looked disconnected, almost hesitant. Passes that should have been sharp and instant were arriving just a fraction too late. That half-second delay might seem small, but at this level, it changes everything. And let's be real, this wasn't against a top-tier opponent. This was against a team already struggling, already carrying multiple losses, playing more for pride than expectation. So when a team is loaded as USA starts slow in that situation, it raises questions. Not panic-level concerns, but real, meaningful questions that matter when you look ahead. Because the teams waiting in the knockout stages? They're not going to ignore this. They're going to study it. They're going to break it down. A slow start here might not cost you the game, but against elite teams like Spain or Australia, that same hesitation could be the difference between control and chaos. Then came the second phase, and suddenly, everything changed. The rhythm clicked. The ball started moving with purpose. The spacing improved. The energy lifted. And for the first time, you could see the true identity of this roster. The transition game opened up beautifully. Defensive rotations became sharp and synchronized. Every movement started to feel connected. For stretches in that second quarter, Team USA looked exactly like what they were built to be, the most talented, most dangerous unit in the tournament. And when everything aligned like that, it wasn't just effective, it was intimidating. The kind of basketball that makes opponents feel overwhelmed before the game is even decided. But then, something shifted again. The third phase brought a completely different feeling, and not in a good way. The structure disappeared. The flow broke down. The game became messy, almost experimental. It felt less like controlled dominance and more like a test in progress. Lineups that hadn't played together were suddenly on the floor. Roles were being adjusted in real time. Players were being placed in unfamiliar positions. And the offense, which had looked so fluid just moments earlier, lost its identity again. But here's the key detail most people miss. This wasn't random. This wasn't a mistake. At this level, especially in international tournaments, blowout games serve a second purpose. Yes, you win. But more importantly, you experiment. You test combinations. You explore possibilities that you simply cannot risk trying in a close game. This has happened before.
Clark draws two, whips it to Boston. Right back to Clark.
It's part of the process. Great teams use early or comfortable games as controlled laboratories. They gather data. They test limits. They push boundaries to understand what works and, more importantly, what doesn't. And that's exactly what was happening here. Different lineups, different roles, different offensive setups, all being tested under real game conditions. Most of those experiments, they worked well enough, useful, informative, valuable for the future. But one experiment didn't just struggle. It failed. Not slightly. Not in a needs improvement kind of way. It failed clearly, consistently, and in a way that couldn't be ignored or explained away. And that failure became the most important takeaway from the entire game. Because when the fourth phase began, one simple adjustment changed everything again. Suddenly, the game felt easy, controlled, natural. And that adjustment? It centered around one key decision. Caitlin Clark running the offense. This is where everything comes together. Because what happened with Clark in this game wasn't just interesting, it was revealing. For most of the game, she wasn't playing her natural role. Instead of controlling the offense, she was moved off the ball, placed in a position where others handled the primary decision-making. From a coaching perspective, it makes sense. You have a comfortable lead. You want to test versatility. You want to see if your most dynamic player can adapt to a different role. Can she still be effective without the ball? Can she create value in new ways? Those are valid questions. And a game like this is the perfect opportunity to find answers. But the answer came quickly. And it came clearly. When Caitlin Clark is taken off the ball, her impact drops dramatically. You could see it immediately. The rhythm wasn't there. The timing felt off. The natural flow of her game disappeared. The shots didn't fall the same way. The opportunities that usually develop through her decision-making simply weren't happening. And more importantly, she didn't look like herself. This isn't new. Anyone who followed her journey already understands this pattern. We've seen it before. At Iowa. In her early professional games. Anytime she's removed from the role of primary playmaker, the entire system shifts, and not for the better. Because Clark's value goes far beyond scoring. It's in her vision, her timing, her ability to read the game seconds before everyone else. She doesn't just react to plays, she creates them before they exist. She manipulates defenses. She controls pace. She dictates outcomes. And when you take that away, you don't just limit her, you weaken the entire structure around her. That's exactly what this game revealed. For a brief stretch, Team USA tried something different. They experimented with her role. And in doing so, they uncovered something critical. Caitlin Clark isn't just another talented player who can fit anywhere. She's a system. And when you build around that system, everything works. But when you move her away from it, even slightly, the cracks begin to show. That's the real story behind the 55-point win. Not the score, not the highlights, but the lesson hidden inside it.
Good job.
Take Caitlin Clark out of the decision-making role, and you don't just remove a player from the offense, you remove the very engine that makes everything else function at a higher level. You strip away the force that elevates every teammate on the floor. Because Clark isn't just another scorer or playmaker who can blend into any system. She is the system. And what this game quietly revealed, especially through its first 3 quarters, was just how noticeable that absence becomes when she's pushed into an off-ball role. Throughout those early stretches, every possession where she stood away from the action, waiting instead of initiating, something felt off. Not broken in an obvious way, but incomplete. There was a missing spark, that intangible rhythm that separates a good offense from a truly dangerous one. It's the difference between a team that simply runs plays and a team that knows exactly what it's doing before the defense even reacts. And when Clark wasn't controlling the tempo, that certainty disappeared. Because her entire game is built around command. Around having the ball in her hands, reading the defense in real time, processing movements before they even happen. She sees the cutter before the cut begins. She recognizes defensive shifts before they fully develop. She accelerates the pace at the exact moment a defense is most vulnerable, not a second too early, not a second too late. And when defenders start collapsing toward her, she punishes that decision instantly, finding the open player with precision that feels almost unfair. All of that vanishes when she's standing 20 feet away from the ball. It's not a flaw in her talent. It's not a weakness. It's simply the reality of what makes her special. You wouldn't take the engine out of a high-performance car and expect it to drive the same way, and that's exactly what happens when Clark is removed from the center of the offense. Then came the fourth quarter, and everything changed. Those final 6 minutes weren't just impressive, they were definitive. They were the kind of stretch that doesn't just influence a game, but reshapes the entire conversation around a player. Because when Clark was finally placed back in her natural role as the primary ball handler, the transformation wasn't gradual, it was immediate. 5 points. 4 assists. 0 turnovers. Read that again. 0 turnovers. For a player who has spent so much of her career being criticized for taking risks, for pushing the limits, for trying to do too much, this stretch delivered the exact opposite narrative. It was controlled, precise, efficient, and above all, flawless. This wasn't luck. It wasn't a hot streak masking deeper issues. This was Caitlin Clark operating in the exact environment where her abilities become most lethal. When she's given control, everything sharpens. Every decision becomes clearer. Every movement has purpose. But here's the part the box score doesn't show you. It wasn't just about the numbers. It was about the feeling of the game. Suddenly, the offense started breathing differently. There was space where there hadn't been space before. Cutters were finding open lanes before defenders even realized what was happening. Shooters were receiving the ball perfectly placed, already in rhythm, already set to release. No hesitation, no adjustment needed. The pace shifted in a way that felt almost unfair. Because at that point, it stopped looking like a simple talent advantage and started looking like a system advantage. And those two things are not the same. Talent can be challenged. Talent can be matched with effort, physicality, or strategy. But a system, especially one run by a player who sees the game seconds ahead of everyone else, is something entirely different. That's not something you close the gap on easily. That's something that overwhelms you before you even understand what's happening. And if you followed Clark's career, this moment shouldn't surprise you. We've seen this pattern before. At Iowa, there were countless games where she struggled early, where shots didn't fall, where the rhythm seemed off, only for her to take over in the final quarter in a way that erased everything that came before. The 2023 NCAA tournament. The 2024 run to the championship game. Time and time again, when the pressure increased, when the margin for error shrank, she didn't fade.
2 points against Indiana in their last possession, but
she elevated. That's not coincidence. That's not narrative. That's a repeatable pattern from a player who thrives when the game matters most. And during that fourth quarter stretch, she wasn't just creating direct scoring opportunities. She was generating what basketball insiders call hockey assists, the pass that leads to the pass that leads to the basket. These are the kinds of plays that never show up in highlight reels. They don't appear in stat graphics. But coaches notice them immediately. Because executing a hockey assist requires something deeper than skill. It requires anticipation, awareness, the ability to track multiple movements at once while the defense is actively trying to shut everything down. And Clark was doing it effortlessly. That's what separates her. Now, to be fair, not everything was perfect. Her three-point shooting in this game wasn't at its usual level. She went 2 for 7 from deep, missing shots that she typically converts with confidence. And against stronger opponents, those misses could matter more, especially since elite teams won't allow her the same freedom to get those looks. But inside the arc, she was perfect. 4 for 4. And not just in this game, throughout the tournament, she hasn't missed a single 2-point attempt. Every shot taken inside the line has gone in. That level of efficiency, combined with the constant threat she presents from long range, creates a unique challenge for any defense. Because how do you guard someone who can hurt you from everywhere while also controlling the entire flow of the game? That's the question teams are going to have to answer. And the fourth quarter gave a very clear message. This team has a choice. And honestly, it's not a complicated one. While much of the focus naturally centers on Clark and her role, it would be unfair to ignore the performances of the players around her, because this roster is filled with talent capable of taking over at any moment. Angel Reese, for example, was a dominant force early in the game. In the first half, she set the tone with energy, physicality, and relentless effort. Her presence in the paint changed everything defensively, forcing opponents to rethink their approach. She controlled the boards, cleaned up mistakes, and provided stability during a period when the offense was still finding its rhythm. She was the anchor. Then there was Rhyne Howard, who stood out to many as one of the most impressive performers overall. From the moment she stepped on the floor, she looked confident, composed, and in control. Her shooting was sharp, her timing was precise, and once she found her rhythm, she became incredibly difficult to contain. Howard has that rare ability to heat up quickly, to score in bursts that shift momentum before defenses can adjust. And when she gets into that zone, the impact is immediate. Kelsey Plum, as always, delivered consistency. Game after game, she continues to contribute offensively in a way that doesn't always grab headlines, but remains incredibly valuable. There's a quiet reliability in her performance, a sense that no matter the situation, she will find a way to make an impact. Jackie Young brought versatility, contributing on both ends of the floor with composure and efficiency. Monica Billings added an unexpected spark, especially in lineups where movement and spacing mattered. Her ability to cut at the right moments and finish around the basket became even more effective when paired with a playmaker like Clark. And that's the key detail. Certain players don't just perform better alongside Clark, they unlock new levels of effectiveness. Because when she's running the offense, everything becomes easier. The reads are cleaner. The opportunities are clearer. The timing is perfect. Even players like Kiki Iriafen benefited from that flow, finishing plays that were created through strong team chemistry and precise ball movement. Defensively, Team USA remained dominant throughout. They disrupted rhythm, forced turnovers, and never allowed their opponent to build any real momentum. Even during the less organized offensive stretches, the defense ensured that the lead was never threatened. But again, the real story wasn't the dominance. It was the discovery. Because hidden inside a 55-point victory was a simple truth that could define everything moving forward. Caitlin Clark doesn't just play the game. She controls it. And when she's given that control, the difference is undeniable.
Clark on the drive.
Now let's pull back from just one game and look at the bigger picture, because when you start analyzing the full tournament instead of a single performance, something becomes clear almost immediately. The deeper you go into the numbers, the patterns, the consistency across games, one name keeps rising to the top again and again. Not occasionally, not by coincidence, but consistently across multiple key areas. And that name is Caitlin Clark. When you break down Team USA's performance statistically throughout the tournament, Clark isn't just contributing, she's leading. In fact, across the 6 major statistical categories that analysts usually focus on, she sits at or near the top in most of them. That alone tells you something important. But when you understand how she's leading, it tells you even more. She leads the team in points per game, averaging around 12.8, and that number might not jump off the page at first glance, but the context behind it makes it far more impressive. She's not operating as a high-volume scorer taking shot after shot. Instead, she's playing as a facilitator, someone whose primary responsibility is to create opportunities for others. And yet, even within that role, she's still outscoring players who are taking more attempts per game. Right behind her is Rhyne Howard, trailing by a noticeable margin. And that gap matters because it shows that Clark isn't just balancing responsibilities, she's excelling in multiple dimensions at once. Then there's her playmaking. Clark leads the team in assists per game, sitting comfortably ahead of established playmakers. And again, this isn't just about numbers, it's about what those assists represent. They reflect control, vision, decision-making under pressure. They reflect a player who doesn't just participate in the offense, but orchestrates it. And when you combine scoring and playmaking at that level, you're looking at something rare. But the conversation doesn't stop there. Clark also leads the team in overall efficiency rating, a metric often referenced in international basketball. Now, efficiency stats can sometimes sound more complex than they actually are, so let's simplify it. The FIBA efficiency rating is essentially a balance sheet of a player's performance. Everything positive, points, rebounds, assists, steals, blocks, gets added. Everything negative, missed shots, turnovers, fouls, gets subtracted. The result is a single number that gives a broad snapshot of overall impact. It's not the most advanced metric in modern analytics, but it's still meaningful. Because to consistently rank at the top, you need to contribute in multiple ways while minimizing mistakes. And Clark doing exactly that across the tournament? That matters. But perhaps the most striking statistic is her efficiency as a scorer. Her true shooting percentage is hovering around an incredible 80%. Let that sink in. That's not just good, that's elite at a level that very few players can sustain. And the main reason behind it is something almost unbelievable. She hasn't missed a single two-point shot in the entire tournament. Every attempt inside the arc has gone in. That kind of perfection forces defenses into impossible decisions. Because now you're not just dealing with a player who can shoot from deep, you're dealing with someone who is automatic when she gets closer to the basket. And speaking of shooting, her three-point percentage sits around 45%, which means she's a legitimate threat from distance as well. So what does that create? A player who can score efficiently at every level of the floor. A player who forces defenders to stretch out to guard the perimeter, but also punishes them instantly if they give up space inside. And when that player also happens to be your primary ball handler, the entire offense becomes exponentially more dangerous. Of course, Clark isn't the only standout on this roster. Angel Reese has been dominant on the boards, leading the team in rebounding, something that comes as no surprise to anyone who has watched her play. Her presence in the paint is overwhelming. She doesn't just collect rebounds, she controls the glass in a way that shifts momentum and creates second-chance opportunities. In fact, when you compare her rebounding ability globally, the list of players who can consistently match her impact is incredibly short. Then there's Monique Billings, who leads the team in blocks per game. Her defensive presence adds another layer of protection inside, making it even harder for opponents to find easy scoring opportunities. And defensively on the perimeter, Paige Buchers stands out, leading the team in steals. Her anticipation, timing, and ability to read passing lanes make her one of the most complete two-way players on the roster. These contributions matter. They're essential pieces of what makes Team USA so strong overall.
Top 4 scorers at the college level.
But even within that collective strength, Clark's influence remains unique. She also ranks at the top in minutes played, essentially tied with other key players, which shows the level of trust the coaching staff places in her. She's not just producing, she's doing it while carrying a significant share of the game's responsibility. Interestingly, when you compare her to someone like Buchers, another elite talent, a subtle difference appears. Buchers actually takes more shot attempts per game despite playing slightly fewer minutes. That detail highlights something important about Clark's role. She's not being used as a pure scorer. She's being used as a creator. And that makes her scoring output even more impressive because it's coming within the flow of facilitating, not dominating possession for the sake of scoring. Now, one area that always comes up in discussions about Clark is turnovers. Yes, she leads the team in turnovers per game. But context matters, and in this case, it matters a lot. Her assist-to-turnover ratio is still well above 2-to-1, which is considered strong for a primary playmaker. More importantly, traditional turnover stats don't fully capture the reality of her style of play. Clark attempts passes that many players wouldn't even see, let alone try. She creates opportunities that don't always result in official assists, because if a teammate misses the shot, it disappears from the stat sheet. The same goes for hockey assists, those crucial passes that lead to the pass that leads to the basket. They don't show up in the numbers, but they're fundamental to how an offense functions at a high level. And when you watch the game closely, you see it. You see how the offense flows differently when she's in control. You see how players move with more confidence, knowing the ball will find them in the right moment. You see how defenses struggle to keep up with decisions that are happening faster than they can react. When you put everything together, scoring, playmaking, efficiency, control, impact, a clear picture begins to form. 3 players stand out across this tournament for Team USA. Caitlin Clark, Rhyne Howard, Paige Buchers. These are the names that consistently appear at the top of the most meaningful categories. Others, like Jackie Young, have been efficient and valuable in their roles. But in blowout games, where intensity can fluctuate, it becomes harder to fully evaluate contributions in the same way. And that brings us back to the bigger point. A 55-point victory might look perfect on paper, but the real story was never in the score. It was in those final 6 minutes. Because in that short stretch, everything became clear. Caitlin Clark at point guard isn't just a lineup adjustment. It's a transformation. The offense doesn't just improve, it evolves. The rhythm sharpens. The spacing opens. The entire floor becomes a weapon. And while this team is filled with incredible talent, players who can dominate in their own ways, the tournament has already revealed one undeniable truth. A team is only as strong as the identity it fully commits to. Right now, that identity runs through Caitlin Clark. So the question isn't whether this team has the ability to win. The question is whether it will recognize its best version in time. Will the coaching staff lean into what clearly works? Will they embrace the blueprint that emerged when Clark was given full control? Or will they continue to experiment, risking disruption when the margin for error disappears? Because the next phase is coming. The competition is getting stronger. The pressure is about to rise. And when those moments arrive, every decision will matter more than ever. Every adjustment, every possession, every choice. This story isn't over. In fact, it's only just beginning. And when the next chapter unfolds, everything may come down to one simple, defining question: what happens when Caitlin Clark is truly running the show?